I started the pandemic, well, I should say I started the pandemic with a newborn baby and a 5-year-old, and I was running a global nonprofit, and I was going to take maternity leave for the first time and really get that space to spend time with my newborn. And then COVID-19 hit, and I found myself having to go back to work, save my global nonprofit, homeschool my 5-year-old, and take care of my newborn baby. And I was just barely making it. Every night I was exhausted. I got COVID-19, but it barely registered. My liver failed. I got acne on my face as if I was 16 years old. And when I looked on my Zoom screen, every mom looked exactly how I felt. And so for so many of us, we said, you know what, let's grin and bear it. And then September's going to come around and the schools are going to open and we're going to get some reprieve. Well, September came around and they didn't open up the schools. And a bunch of male legislators came up with this idea of hybrid learning, where a default caretaker, a mom, would have to log on her child to school at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 12 o'clock, all the while maintaining her full-time job. And we saw that this epidemic, because we had a broken infrastructure of care, was literally pushing mothers and women out of the labor force, especially women of color. And so when that December jobs report came out and all the jobs lost were by mothers, and we saw that over 5 million women had left the workforce, the vast majority being women of color, I again thought to myself, well, where's the plan? Where's the plan? You can't get to labor market participation at where it was in 1989. You can't lose 30 years of progress in 9 months and not have a plan for recovery. And so I wrote the Marshall Plan for Moms. It started as an op-ed. And then I read the comment section and it really pissed me off. And so I decided that we were going to take a full ad out in the New York Times with a bunch of prominent business leaders, celebrities, activists saying, President Biden, where's the plan? Mothers are not America's social safety net. And, the idea really, touched a nerve. And I think so many moms wanted to be taken from rage to hope. And the Marshall Plan for Moms, we've basically introduced 2 resolutions in Congress. One by Congresswoman Grace Ming and the second one by Senator Amy Klobuchar and Senator Duckworth. We have a handful of Marshall Plan for Moms resolutions across the city, across the municipality. And basically these resolutions say this, to shorten the economic recovery for mothers, we need a handful of things. The first thing that we need is basic income payments for mothers. Every mom I know needs cash. She needs cash, whether it's to pay the rent, whether it's to put food on the table, whether it's to support her family, and every mother's situation is not the same. Today that form of cash is coming in the child care tax credit, under Biden's, America Families Plan. So I think that message has really resonated, that we need to give families support. And other nations have a maternity allowance, family allowance. The United States has nothing. And so the child care tax credit is the start. And I would argue that it's a down payment on the Marshall Plan. The second thing we need is paid leave and affordable child care. So many of my sisters from so many different organizations have been fighting for, childcare, been fighting for paid leave for far too long. And, I think, the vast majority of low-income mothers and women of color go back to work 2 weeks after having a child, 2 weeks. That's unconscionable. And if we think about whether our, American brothers and sisters had paid leave in those early months of January and February, we would have saved a lot of lives. And so affordable childcare and, paid leave are 2 big, important structural fixes that we have to make. The third thing is we got to open up schools safely 5 days a week. The jobs report just came out and everybody was really disappointed. And they're like, well, why haven't we made games? Well, we haven't made games because moms are still at home. Daycares are not open. Schools are still closed down, right? We haven't made those structural changes so moms can have the confidence, to go back into the workforce, in addition to making sure that we're vaccinated. And finally, far too many women lost their jobs, because they found themselves in jobs that weren't pandemic-proof, like healthcare, education, retail. Those jobs aren't coming back. And we know that 70% of low-income families are run by a single breadwinner, often a mother, and often a mother of color. And so when she loses her job, the entire family goes into poverty. And so what's the plan to make sure that those women, have a chance, at getting back on their feet and getting back into the workforce? So that's a little bit of an overview of the Marshall Plan for Moms. And,
we've made a tremendous amount of progress, and I think we've really going to set the frame for conversation. And I think that moms everywhere are they're pissed off, and they don't feel seen. And that if there's ever been a moment to kind of finish this fight once and for all, it's now.
We brought this meeting of the minds today because of not only that, Reshma, but this is about our children at the end of the day. Whether you're a mom, a caregiver, and so forth, this is affecting everyone, including the next generation. And we have to get this right at this point. I mean, at the end of the day, it's mental health for children, it's well-being of all caregivers, and that's what's really pulling our economy forward at the moment. And I wanted Riane to give a little bit of comments because she has focused so much on the 4 pillars, including not only what this does for women, but what this is going to do for our children. So Riane, could you please address some of the comments that Reshma had shared with us? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anu, and thank you, Reshma. You have been able to bring these issues attention, and that is fantastic. And I congratulate you. I've been working, as Anu says, on these issues for decades. My book, The Real Wealth of Nations, which I highly recommend to you, introduced not only the concept of human infrastructure, but the economics that we need, which is a caring economics of partnerism that no longer marginalizes or simply ignores the contributions that moms and all caregivers, whether they're women or men, make. We need to change the whole economic system so that we can change this, make visible the gender system of values that is built into both capitalism and socialism, which considers this work of caregiving just reproductive rather than productive, which is something I deal with in The Real Wealth of Nations. That's what's taught in our economic schools. I mean, we need a new frame. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown that we need both businesses and government policies, okay? So that whole argument about capitalism versus socialism, it's a distraction. A colleague of mine calls all of these conventional categories, right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, weapons of mass distraction, because they not only tell us what we need to build, but they marginalize or ignore nothing less than the majority of humanity, women and children. So I've introduced a whole new approach, a holistic category, 2 holistic categories, the domination system and the partnership system. Now, economics don't arise in a vacuum, as you know. They're embedded in the larger culture. So what you're talking about is really not only changing legislation, but changing an old embedded system of beliefs, what I call a gendered system of values, where somehow there's always enough money for prisons, that's the punitive male head of household in the nomination system, right? Or for weapons and wars, the hero is warrior is killer, but somehow there isn't enough money for the soft, the so-called feminine, for healthcare, for child care, for paid parental leave, for all the things that you are bringing about. I would like to support what you're doing. My one suggestion would be that as the title of this thing, we want men to also do this work and to only make it moms, while it has a wonderful ring to it, the Marshall Plan for Moms. I think we need to explain that we're talking about moms and all caregivers, and that we're talking not only about both women and men, but we're talking about social and economic systems and policies. And I think people are ready for this. I know that my book, The Real The Chalice and the Blade just came out in Spanish in a new translation in Spain, and there's been a media firestorm about it. So we need to really do what you're doing, which is to get these ideas not only into policy, but also into changing the conversation. We don't have to argue about capitalism versus socialism. I mean, they both came out of the 1800s and 1700s, for goodness sakes. But they also perpetuate this hidden system of gendered values. So we need to move to a caring economics of partnerism. And I see what you're doing as a very important step in that direction.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts, Reshma, about what I've said?
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think the conversation about, when I launched the Marshall Prayer for Moms, a lot of some of the feedback was, well, motherhood's a choice. And, we live in a capitalistic society and you shouldn't get anything. You chose to have kids. And I think that that is so deeply embedded in our culture, which is why we need to make these cultural and social shifts. I think the reason why I focused on motherhood, it's similar. So, I started Girls Who Code. And when I started Girls Who Code, people always said to me, well, what about the boys? Don't the boys need to learn how to code? And at that time, less than 18% of the technology workforce was female. And so we didn't have a problem with boys learning how to code. We had a problem with girls learning how to code. Similarly here, I mean, even if you look at the last jobs report, women mothers, because 86% of women in the economy are mothers, we lost 164,000 jobs. Men gained 355,000. So all parents are not treated equally in this pandemic. And so the reason I called it Moms, and I knew that it was going to get, and a lot of my friends on the left were the ones saying, hey, change it to parents, change it to caregivers, what about the dads? And for me, my response is, well, this is about focus and not exclusion. And I want to get to a world where 50% of the gender caretaking at home is done equally, but we're not there yet. And we have to ask ourselves, why? And I think what's so interesting for my generation, right? I grew up in obviously an Indian household, and my mother expected when she got married in her arranged marriage that she would be doing most of the housework, even though she didn't, because they were refugees. That's a whole other story. But when I got married, I very much expected that we would equally share the housework. And to my shock, when I had children, it wasn't the case. And it was almost like everything I was hearing in society, well, that was my fault. That was my shame to bear. I couldn't tell the truth. It was my job to train my partner how to do something differently. And what I have learned, and the evolution I've come to, is that so much of this is so deeply embedded in our social norms and our cultural norms. It's why we offer paid leave, but the private sector companies that offer it, only 7% of men take it. So it's not just about calling it parental leave. It's about how do you design it, right? And I know you're shaking your head because you talk about all this in your book. How do you design it in a way that is going to lead to equality? And I think that that's like the most awesome, interesting conversation I think we need to have right now. And you're right, I think people are ready for it.
Well, I just to jump in for a moment on the point, the Swedes started with offering parental leave, and the men weren't taking it, so they changed it so that in a two-parent family, whether it's a homosexual one or a heterosexual, it doesn't matter. If they don't both take it, nobody gets it. And they joined that, however, with a public information campaign. So we have the models. I mean, I have a lot of the models that we can use. But I think that I'm not suggesting that you change it from a Marshall Plan for Moms. I'm just wondering if perhaps even in a paren, you can add an all caregivers. Because the problem is the devaluation of caring and caregiving as feminine, as soft, and therefore whether it's done by a man, if it's done by a man, he's a sissy, right? or he's a wimp. We're going to change that so that we can have, and it's a process, but the norms can be changed, have been changed. And that's our job.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely. I mean, I want to let Betty get into this too. You're absolutely, and I want to tell you a funny story, right? About a friend of mine who runs the Motherhood Center was telling me, she runs the Motherhood Center here in New York, and she goes, every time I go out and I talk about the fact that we need to support mothers postpartum and if they're going through depression, and she goes, every single time I talk, someone raises their hand and they say, well, what about the dads? What about the dads? Aren't they depressed too? And it's like, it's sometimes in the moment where we're trying to change behavior by calling it for what it is at this moment, right? We need to call it for what it is so we can get to the world as we want it to be. And I do agree. I totally agree with you in terms of like the parenthesis, right? Because whatever we do in this moment, for mothers, like the UK, for example, calls it a family allowance, but it mostly goes to moms, right? Language does matter, but even I think that my insight from this too is that it's like you said, it's not language alone. And you're right about Norway. They went from 77% to 98% by really shifting cultural norms along with it. And I appreciate your point.
Beautiful. And I do want to get Betty into this conversation because you have your own journey as a single mother and perspectives on how things are working now and what can we do from where we're standing right now to improve the situation, to make it more fair, to make it more balanced going forward. Betty, can you unmute yourself? Can you hear me?
Yes, Uh-oh. I can hear you. I'm here. Just listening to Reshma and Riane, I mean, certainly it's all very thought-provoking and all very timely. I started Empower Her Institute, and as Reshma said, she started Girls Who Code, and she would get well, what about the boys? What about empowering him? I said, you're right. There are needs for the boys, but our focus is on the girls. And I like what Reshma's saying. It's focus, not exclusion. And then the other part of it is, so Riane, when we're talking about 80% of the females really being impacted here, I think we really want to drive our energy toward the big piece of the pie. So if you solve that problem, the other 20% will flow, and so you can't, when you start to divide your energy among too many aspects, then you basically dilute your efforts to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish, which is the big piece, which is impacting women and affecting the whole gender equity piece. So I think it has to be done in stages, but both of you are right. But again, it's kind of like Black Lives Matter. When we say Black Lives Matters and everybody wants to say, well, all lives matter. And the fact of the matter is Black lives and Black folks are going through some very unique experiences that all people are not going through. And so we need to solve the problems that have been part of the post infrastructure system, just part of our norm about how people are treated. But Anu, in terms of, they've made, both Reshma and Riane made the point, but I want to emphasize the point that Reshma made, which is that when we looked at this pandemic and we looked at the jobs that were lost, 70% of those jobs were heads of households from people of color, which are primarily females, right? I mean, so we're talking about.
I'm Betty. How many?
70% of the job. 70%, yes, of people of color are headed by single-family households, and I think that number was 70%, wasn't it, Reshma? That of folks who lost their jobs?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So again, you start to look at, and I love, and New always talks about the bottom billion. I don't know what we call it when we talk about it here in this country, but we're talking about the bottom level of our society being the hardest hit here. And quite frankly, I saw it in live and living color with the girls that we were serving at Empower Her Institute. When the pandemic hit, their parents were out of work. Their parents didn't have unemployment insurance. They were having trouble trying to provide basic needs for their families, anywhere from trying to get access to the internet because they couldn't afford to pay internet costs, to providing sanitary napkins for their kids because they didn't have that disposable income. And so we jumped into action to get an emergency fund to provide some funds for these families. And by the way, I had to explain to funders why we were giving them cash because they want to get all paranoid. Oh, wow, like they're going to run off with $100, like.
I think that we need, I agree with you, Betty, we need to focus on moms. We really need to focus also on measuring economic health differently. And I want to just suggest one addition to your Marshall Plan for Mothers. We're developing new indicators of economic health that demonstrate the economic value, not only the human and environmental value of the work of caring for people, starting at birth, and caring for nature. And if you get in touch with me, I can send you a two-pager on that. We have a team of very good economists condensing these indicators now into an index, one or two. And I would love to see that be part of your plan because, frankly, that is a way of changing the system, of giving policymakers the evidence they have lacked, the data they have lacked to make sound decisions. And
I just had an op-ed in the New York Times, and there's a lot of data in that. But if women were paid for their unpaid labor at minimum wage in 2019, they would have made $1.5 trillion. And so it's not accounted for in our GDP. It affects every aspect, whether it's Social Security laws, our tax code. Even the way that the child care tax credit is being administered. It is being administered where it goes to the breadwinner who earns the most money, which is often a man. Even though it's the mother who's taking care of the children. And so much of this is embedded in the way that we value that work. But, going back to Betty, because I think both of us probably experienced this with our students, that one of the other things that we didn't talk about in this pandemic is the impact on Black girls, of the lack of care structure. So much of the lost generation were Black and brown girls who were having to do the caretaking of their younger siblings so their mothers could go to work, and all of the policies and proposals and conversations, nobody has really said, this is a huge problem. And what is our intervention for Black girls, in particular, in the economic loss that they suffered because of the broken care structure? And again, it goes back to the fact, and how we we spent so much time in Michelle Obama's initiative, Let Girls Learn, of recognizing that in India and Africa and other countries that so much of a girl's potential is lost because we rely on her to do housework. Well, the same thing's happening here in the United States, period. And it's happening to girls. And so we have got to ask ourselves, why do we always devalue, and how do we have a true generational strategy when it comes to our intervention? So thank you so much, Betty, because I do think we have to keep our eyes on who is being impacted, not just moms and women, but mothers of color, girls of color.
Absolutely. Riane, do you have any more comments on that? I'm sure you do.
Well, it's a systemic problem. And we have to really, as I said, and this is why the metrics, so many of the new metrics being proposed ignore care work. they just talk about general quality of life. They ignore the studies showing that actually the status of women and girls is a powerful predictor both of general quality of life and economic success. And this is the information that I think the Marshall Plan can do an awful lot of systemic good by also saying we've got to change how we really measure economic health. And we've inherited the devaluation in both capitalism and socialism. I mean, think about it, even when Marx was writing, women were supposed to do that work for free in a male-controlled household. So it became invisible. And we have to make it now visible. But we also have to make it valued so that not only women, and that's why really the changing masculinity is important, because otherwise we're really not looking at it holistically.
No, Riane, I totally appreciate and respect the process that you've developed for us to begin to look at this from a measurement standpoint, because what we know is what gets measured gets done, and so we're not minimizing that by any stretch of the imagination. I think when we look at how deep the problem is for denying, for the impact that's happening to our women and our girls in this caregiving system, there are a lot of systemic issues, but there are layers in this systemic issue. So when we talk about how our girls of color are part of the caregiving structure, a lot of that has to do with culture. It has to do with family structure, right? It has to do with our immigration system and the fact that those families don't have access or don't feel empowered to gain access to resources in order to change the dynamic. Because I hear it. I mean, it's real. I mean, we're talking about 13 and 14-year-olds who will share that they couldn't do their homework because they had to fix dinner for their siblings because their parents had to go out and get a job. I mean, and so where we can clearly see how education is being denied in third world countries, we need folks to see how education and generations are being denied quality education here in this country. And I love what was said in the meditation this morning, is that mothers can heal the nation in one generation. That was
so powerful.
Right?
And you have to start by healing yourself so you can heal your family, so you can heal your nation. It doesn't happen any other way.
Right. I also bring that up to say that we have to start and get a foothold into things that we can change quickly, that then gets basically a snowball effect, if you will, for changing all of so many things that have to get changed. But we have to do it through leverage. And I think the leverage that you talk about, Riane, is partnership.
Well, I think we can change things quickly through new metrics, because as you say, what we measure what we value, and we value what we measure. And the fact that even the so-called GDP alternatives ignore this, except for the social wealth economic indicators in the index. And you can find out more about it at centerforpartnership.org for my books. But I absolutely agree with both of you that we have to start with where people are. But we have to, I always talk about it, I use a woman's metaphor, that rather than getting a bigger slice of the existing pie, we want to bake a better pie, a better social and economic pie. That's what it's about, because we'll always be on the margins unless we change that devaluation and these rigid gender stereotypes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Betty, you made me think about, I was thinking about my mother, and, my parents came here as refugees, and they couldn't afford the $50 for childcare, and so I was a latchkey kid. And I was thinking about a recent movie that I watched, Through the Night. I don't know if anybody's seen Moira Limbaugh's movie. It's about kind of mothers of color and about how so many people in the care economy, especially mothers of color, because they're forced, they don't have the flexibility, they don't have the things that often many white parents do. They put their kids into daycare at night. And, so much of the existing conversation, I sometimes feel like it's a very elite conversation of how do we support, and pay women to take care of wealthy women's babies and children, and not how do we create a structure, so that every mother, regardless of whether her, how much money she makes or the color of her skin, she can have that time to be and to take care of her child in a humane way. And we need to have that conversation. And, I think digging back into the history of the Wages for Housework campaign and what happened, how in the 1990s, how we stigmatized welfare to work and Black mothers and all of that just needs to be kind of very much re-examined as we think about what this new care infrastructure is going to look like. And I just want us to ask for the moon, and to ask for everything for everyone, and not ask for things that we think that we can actually get. Because we're always so used to operating from a place of scarcity.
So Rachel, you go ahead, Riane, then I'll jump in.
No, I was going to say that the fact that Biden and Harris are talking about human infrastructure, and even though it got sort of co-opted to just be the care economy rather than all policies being informed by caring for people and for nature, that is an enormous change. But they need the social wealth index to really show the people who control the resources that it is essential economically, especially in our post-industrial age. And that really what we've been taught is reproductive only work is the most important human work. And I think that that can be part of the messaging. Because it is, as Betty said, and as you said, Reshma, it can all be in different levels.
Yeah. Thank you, Riane. So we have about 15 minutes today, and one of the goals of having this conversation today, Reshma, is to have actionable items for all these people listening. We're recording this session. It's going to be shared again widely through all of our socials, our partner socials, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of women and girls that are watching this conversation today, and of course men as well, who are in positions to actually help us move this conversation forward. And we hope we can have this conversation again next month when we do our Stronger Together Summit, June 22nd to 24th, when we honor fathers who are helping us move forward. What are action items that we can be doing? What are action items that we can be doing and telling the people who are watching help move this conversation forward? This is for each and every single one of us to start thinking, because mindset won't change immediately. This is something that, obviously we've been living this way for so long, and, to move it forward, what is it going to take for us to see real change, real progress? I'll let you start.
So I would love everyone to go to the MarshallPlanForMoms.com, because I think we really outlined what the agenda is. So, our goal is to shorten the economic recovery for mothers. So it doesn't take 10 years, 15 years to get back to where we were, because we're now in 1989, but it takes much shorter. And so I think the first part of that is, one, the legislative agenda. And so I think that there are a lot of, obviously, Biden's America Families Plan is very important, very powerful, very revolutionary. We need to make sure that it gets passed. And so everyone needs to know what's in that plan. Everyone needs to literally, it is, we cannot take it for granted that will get passed. Everyone's going to, it's going to go into the finance committees. Everyone's going to try to poke a bunch of holes in it. But as crazy as this sounds, is I tell them, my moms and my PTA, we got to march for paid leave. We got to march for affordable childcare. We got to march for things that we need. and we don't have to be martyrs, and we can ask for things. And so I think getting really smart and getting really active on the America Families Plan is really important. I think the second thing is we have to continue to shift culture. You know, last week we launched this fake, you know, Mother's Day flower store. And, you know, because I don't know about you, but like I kept getting all these ads from like Nike being like, Mom's a superhero, buy her some sneakers, you know? And it was like, what? Do you know what this happened to us this year? It was so tone deaf. And so we created this Moms Deserve More flower store to like educate people. Well, this is the cost of childcare. This is the cost of mental health. Do you know that when we started this pandemic, 1 out of 5 mothers said that they were depressed. Now it's 70%. So like there is like so much happening, right? To mothers right now. So we got to get people educated. We got to shift cultural norms. I mean, it goes back to what we talked about, like, you know, companies want to hire the guy who takes his son to Little League, but he calls him a wimp if he takes paid leave. So, like, you have to change the norms around masculinity. You have to change the norms around unpaid labor. You have to shift that. And I think the third opportunity, and we're going to be releasing, you know, in July, a Marshall Plan for Moms at Work, is as everybody's talking about this new normal and what the workplace is going to look like, you know, how do we create a playbook to really create a workplace that it's going to support caregiving and to support mothers? So what does flexibility look like? What does remote working look like? How do you mandated parental leave? You know, why do you pay me to freeze my eggs, but you don't subsidize my childcare, right? How can companies push on both ends? So, you know, it's not just white collar workers at Target, but it's every single employee at Target that gets subsidized childcare. You know, so how are we pushing, you know, to rebuild our workplace? We always say that, like, you know, when millennials were coming to the workplaces, everybody got out the popcorn and the bean bags, but they never did anything for us. They never shifted work for us. We shifted ourselves for them. We hit our children. We didn't, you know, we bent over backwards. We had the motherhood. Moms still make 25 cents on every dollar made by dads. And Third Way had a study that showed that essentially the pay gap is not attributed to childless women and childless men. It's attributed to mothers and fathers. When we see a dad, we say, he is committed. Let me hire him and give him a raise. When they see me with my 15-month-old and my 6-year-old, they say, well, she's not committed. Don't give her that promotion. So we have got to change these social norms and put pressure, you know, on companies, you know, work with our brothers and sisters in unions and to make this like massive cultural and social norm shift, because legislation alone won't help. You know, it won't be the only thing. It won't get us entirely there. We need a national reckoning on motherhood.
Riane, I'm going to let you comment on this, please. I know you're waiting patiently. Jump in. Absolutely.
Wanted to say we really are talking about redefining what is and is not productive. It's that fundamental. And when we talk about education, if we only educate our daughters and sons in the same old normal, quote unquote, we're not achieving that. That's why I place so much emphasis on new metrics, which will support the legislation we need, but which will also support the mind change, the consciousness change that we need. You know, the one thing I wanted to add is that we hear so much from economists, even who live in a kind of a parallel universe most of the time, about the most important capital now in our post-industrial era being high-quality human capital. But as my book, Nurturing Our Humanity, which came out with Oxford University Press recently, shows whether what they don't tell us is that whether we have these flexible, creative, resilient people or not, largely hinges on the quality of care and education children receive in the first 5 years. So I absolutely agree with needing a Marshall Plan for a Woman. I also agree, by the way, Betty, that we really should think of having a tour for the American Families Plan, because we're talking about changing our educational system. which is really very, very important. And I see that Nyla Rogers is on the call, and Nyla is a member of our team at the center working and will be talking about the social wealth index. But I think that we have to work on all levels. Start with the actual pain that the present system has caused. I mean, do we really want to go back to a normal where 1/4 of all children in the US live in poverty? No. We want to change the old normal. And this is our chance.
Absolutely, and I'm going to chime in here. So with regards to whatever support you need, Reshma, we're going to have these conversations once a month, and next month we're going to bring all 500 of our speakers from this month and International Women's Day together, include the men in this conversation. We're going to blow this up. Anything we can do from our standpoint to advance what you're working on, you have our full support, our community support. So you just let us know, and